Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning, and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. I am your host, Karl Kassell. Today we are going to explore a topic that has brought relief to some and angst to others. The 1619 Project is a long-form journalism project developed by Nicole Hannah-Jones, writers from the New York Times and the New York Times Magazine, which aims to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of the United States national narrative. In the state of Iowa, Republican legislators have drafted a bill to reduce funding to districts whose teachers utilize this curriculum in their classroom. McKinley Thompson, director of the Academy for Scholastic and Personal Success, and Todd Dorman, columnist at the Gazette, are going to join us today to discuss this topic and the ramifications, either good or bad, that it might have on our educational system here in the state of Iowa. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Karl.
Good morning. So first, let's just talk about the 1619 Project, it coming about a couple years ago, and you guys just give kind of your background and understanding of the project in its totality.
Todd, I'll defer to you.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a project of the New York Times that is led by Nicole Hannah-Jones, as you mentioned, who's a Waterloo native, grew up in Waterloo, and sort of weaves her experience growing up there into especially her Pulitzer Prize winning essay that sort of kicks off the project. Its main purpose sort of put the experiences of Black Americans at the center of the American story, to sort of dive into how influential slavery was in shaping how the country was formed, how the Constitution was written, how the founding fathers sort of made decisions that affect us to this day, and then of course just the deep-rooted discrimination that's a part of the American story and is still a problem to this day. So it's history, it's relevant now. Actually, to me, it's also of course journalism. New York Times is a newspaper. This was a Pulitzer Prize winning project, and it's probably the most troubling to me that we have legislators that would try to censor a piece of journalism. I mean, I can imagine that, maybe down the road when we send newspapers and education newspapers to schools, maybe they'll ask to have the opinion page removed because it's too liberal or something like that. So I think there's a lot of implications both for teaching history and also for free expression.
Thank you. Eric, anything?
Yeah, I everything that Todd has said is a bullseye, and to add anything to the impetus for Nicole Hannah-Jones, in many of her speeches and many of her TED Talks, many of her visits throughout the country, pre-COVID-19, and even during, for example, the lecture series where she kicked it off last year at the University of Iowa, she has said, I'm quoting her, "I see my work as forcing us to confront our hypocrisy, forcing us to confront the truth that we would rather ignore." And she could stop with the depth and breadth of work that she has already amassed after that comment and say, read what I've researched. But she can go she goes further than that. And she is not, and I won't put words in her mouth. I won't speak for her. She does not besmirch the United States. She is proud of the country in which she was born, in the state that she is a native of, in a town, north, roughly 60 miles north of Cedar Rapids. But what she has done is what, to me, in my subjective opinion, as a historian, and I'm I can't divorce myself from being a biracial man with a black father and a white mother. I am not, nor is Sister Hannah Jones. We are not individuals for whom the Constitution was created. We are not individuals for whom the Declaration of Independence was written. And as a result, you do not find our history, to say nothing about mine being a biracial American citizen, to the degree you do not find it, to the depth, to the intimacy that she has simply added to the discourse. She is not revisiting, she is not rewriting this country's history. What she has done is she has provided the facts and the reality that most, if not all, public American classroom history textbooks leave out. And it's the work that some do if they choose to go to college or university after graduating high school. She has provided the work that you may find on a college campus, okay? You may find in a university classroom. If you look for it, you won't find it in mass, right, in primary or secondary school. She has not created a project that smears the United States. In fact, she has done this country a great service by providing more evidence of factual detail as to how this country was created.
Good. So talk to me about your thoughts on this quote. The bill accused the Times Project of attempting to deny or obfuscate the fundamental principles upon which the United States was founded. And it also goes on, the General Assembly has a strong interest in promoting an accurate account of this nation's history through public schools, informing young people into knowledgeable and patriotic citizens. So my question is, if students knew true history, does that stop them or hinder them from being knowledgeable and patriotic?
I personally, I will give students the benefit of the doubt and not cast an aspersion upon them when human beings receive knowledge for the first time. This information, this literal history. I've said this for years, and not necessarily recently, but I have said it when discussing American history. When a student has in the past or currently asks, why don't we know this? Why wasn't this in the book? I don't say it was pushed out. I would say I won't say it's being hidden from you. I will just say, I'll answer that question this way. If you're looking for a real soap opera, American history is it. You don't have to watch daytime stories to find lying, cheating, murdering, smearing. That's what American history has in it. It's not saying anything that isn't there. Creating a patriotic citizen, I think that's a subjective label. I mean, who's defining what patriotism is? I think one should start from there. I think if you asked, the three of us excluded, if you ask 5 people, what does patriotism mean? What does patriotism mean to you? You'd probably get 5 different answers. And those answers would differ given race, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status. I don't think Nicole Hannah Jones is not denying the fundamental principles that America, as they say, was founded upon. What she proves is that who told you about those founding principles, and then how did they implement them, and for whom? Mm-hmm. Once you provide that information, then you say to the person consuming that information, now you make your decision. And hopefully that educator, right, the person disseminating that information, doesn't sway that opinion, but just provides you, here it is, you decide.
Todd, any thoughts?
Well, and I think a truly free nation that founded in liberty, should not be afraid of its history. It should not be afraid to teach kids a robust and full understanding of how things happened and how the past has shaped the present. I just, a lot of times politicians will try to present this sort of, cheap plastic patriotism that, is filled with all of these myths that we've been taught over the years about great white men shaping the country. And George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and a lot of these folks did do great things, but they also did things that were not great. And I think learning the full sort of well-rounded lessons about these men and everyone who shaped, the country's history is important. And it's important to not whitewash what kids are being taught. It's important to look at slavery with a clear eye and how it shaped the country, and racism that is, like I say, is still, haunting us to this day. I mean, we've seen protests last summer. We've seen these issues of racial equality and social justice and systemic racism be brought to the fore. Our kids have got to be equipped with a historical background to understand why this is happening and why it's important. And I'm just afraid that our history education hasn't prepared them very well, which is why we see, pushback against someone like Colin Kaepernick, who takes a knee for the national anthem, and people saying that he doesn't respect the flag or he doesn't respect the armed forces. If you understand the history of protest in the country and the history of Black Americans fighting for civil rights, his protest fits firmly within that, but people don't understand that. And so this is where we have disagreements, because the history hasn't been taught well and people don't understand why these movements are occurring.
Amen. Amen. So here's a quote from one of our state reps, Raz Smith, who obviously opposed the measure in our state legislature. And he says good and bad can exist in American history. And so he kind of dumbed it down for people by making a simple quote. Fact, George Washington was a founding father. George Washington was a slave owner. That's the complexity of America. How do we move further past these divisive times if we're not even willing to acknowledge one truth or one fact? And facts and truth, for some reason, are struggling to coexist together.
That is it's a really great question, and I like the fact about Washington being a founding father. In fact, it honed and enslaved, and I'll say this. I do this purposefully. I will say an enslaved Black American. That's my personal, not spin, whatever anybody wants to call it. To that end, these facts also go together. 4 of the first 5 American presidents owned enslaved Black Americans. 7 of the first 9 Supreme Court justices of the United States owned Black Americans. The same people that believed in, give me liberty or give me death, kept humans in chains and treated them as chattel. To not tell, and I'll piggyback on what Todd said, to not tell an aspiring member of our civil body politic in a classroom of a room of learning, to not tell them these things is to defy them the opportunity to truly learn of the country in which they were born. Everything, nothing, all the time, every day, all day is raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens, right? That's a song. These are a few of it's even in the title, my favorite things. So you'll say, if you put it to the apple pie and baseball and summer nights and, blankets, fireworks and ice cream, those are favorite things. Now, why are these fireworks being shot off? Because on July 2nd, independence was arrived at by the 4th the document had been signed. And John Adams says, I'm paraphrasing, that this day should be celebrated with cannon and fireworks and songs and patriotic themes. Yes. And then let us talk about those human beings that at that time were enchained. The war for independence, they gave life. All people who died against Great Britain gave their life for an idea of freedom and democracy. That idea of freedom and democracy. Who was able to implement that idea? A certain class of people in this country. And there were some who, even in bondage, in fact, most, I would argue, in bondage, fought to get out of that because they aspired to, my ancestors aspired to that idea. But the implementation of that idea is completely different than the patriotic paintings and the stories that some are told from birth through senior year of high school. To deny them this, no wonder so many people are offended, as Todd pointed out, that Colin Kaepernick, a biracial man, taking a knee, saying, I am not against the military, and I'm not against police. I'm against unarmed Black Americans being murdered. I can't stand for a flag that protects those who implement violence upon the unarmed, upon the darker of this country. He's castigated, right? I don't like the term, but he's blacklisted. Okay, 4.5 years later, the NFL commissioner apologizes. I wasn't listening. You were listening. Don't look at me and tell me that you were listening when there are words proving that you weren't. Okay, you could have defended him then and you didn't. And the same human being you were angry at, those individuals angry at him would be proud for people, for example, yelling in the face of healthcare workers that are providing all American citizens affected by COVID-19. I don't want to wear a mask. And they're screaming at the State House in Michigan, screaming at the state capitol in Texas. They're screaming, my freedom and my rights are being violated. Okay. Those same people that would spit in their face would be angry at Colin Kaepernick for being unpatriotic. How patriotic is it to spit in somebody's face who's providing health care services for all of humanity? That dog doesn't hunt. To deny citizens of this country, deny human beings the story of the country, all chapters, is disingenuous.
Todd, anything to add?
Well, and Nicole Hannah-Jones writes in her opening essay about her father, joining the military, hoping that he could, be seen as a real American, and flying that crisp American flag on the corner of their yard, and being proud of those principles, and being proud of the country, despite the fact, all the setbacks it handed him. And one of the other dangers of sort of this whitewashing of history is the founding fathers were men. They were politicians. They weren't deities. This idea that the Constitution is somehow unchangeable, 200 and nearly 50 years later, because these guys were handed wisdom from God or something. They were men trying to create a government. And so when we try to expand the Constitution to include civil rights for different classes of people, and we try to include, new things that need to be dealt with in our society, and some conservatives say, well, the Constitution doesn't mention same-sex marriage, or it doesn't mention transgender people, so we can't expand it to provide, equal protection under law. I mean, that's a function of misreading history. That's a function of basically peddling myths rather than teaching about who these people actually were, what their motivations were, the good things they did, and the sins they committed. I mean, they weren't deities. They were basically politicians, and there's always dangers in deifying politicians.
True story. So let me combine a question. One, should district funding be should funding be eliminated by teaching historical curriculum such as this? And can this be considered government overreach? But why is our country so afraid to really deal with the checkered past that you guys are mentioning, of the inhumane treatment of people in this country?
Well, I mean, I think basically it is an overreach. I mean, it opens the door to all sorts of ridiculous legislative micromanaging of what's taught in schools. I mean, this bill even applies to the community college and university level. I mean, just imagine the disruption of research and academic freedom that it would have at those levels. And I think basically, you know, the problem people have with this, whether they would admit it or not, is, you know, dealing with our history straight on means dealing with the present straight on and acknowledging that, you know, this systemic, you know, racism that's rooted in so many of our institutions and so much of our history has to be dealt with. And a lot of people don't want to deal with it. They want to pretend, well, we had a civil rights movement and that's over. And so what are people complaining about? So it's the politics of today that is coloring this push to not deal with these past injustices.
I agree with Todd. It is government overreach. It's a literal example of that. You're suppressing something, and the government passes a bill to say what you can and can't teach, and if you don't do it, we're going to remove funding. I find it very ironic, given that when you have the Elementary and Secondary Act passed during the Lyndon Johnson administration, and you have that battle for the desegregation or integration of public schools, particularly in the city of Chicago. The federal government would withhold funds for districts that wouldn't integrate their school system. And Professor Dion Dance has written a great book, The Desegregation of Chicago Public Schools, and provides you a roadmap through multiple administrations of superintendents of the city of Chicago juxtaposed against the Daley administration, and how politics played a role in deciding who would attend schools. You've got open buildings in the city of Chicago, but they say these buildings can't be used for public education. White families leaving the inner city of Chicago, moving out to the suburbs. It wasn't just Long Island that suffered from white flight. Chicago did also. You know, Karl, you're as Dr. White will happily say regularly, you're a star alum of the Academy. To suppress the teaching of American history is to tell past, current, and future Academy for Scholastic and Personal Success students who are Black and brown and biracial that you do not matter. The stories of your parents, your grandparents, and your ancestors do not matter that much. And it's James Baldwin, who says, I love America more than any other country in the world. And that's exactly for this reason why I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. Brother Baldwin pulled no punches. He loved America and criticized it at the same time. It's if facts are going to be withheld, that's one step, and that's one domino that can push many others behind it.
Spot on. Thank you. So we know we have those who are contrary, but we have this project also receiving top 10 works of journalism of the decade. I mean, Todd, you mentioned it. She won the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for her commentary on this project. Is this deserving recognition? And if so, my question is, then how can we, if she's deserving of some of the top awards in this country in journalism, how can we avoid teaching what she wrote about? Yeah,
and I mean, how can we censor journalism? I mean, that's un-American. I mean, all the you know, a lot of the Pulitzer Prize winning stuff, the really good journalism makes people angry.
Mhm.
It draws criticism. I mean, you know, you've got the coverage of the Pentagon Papers that the Nixon administration actually tried to put you know, publishers and editors and reporters in jail.
Mhm.
I mean, it's, you know, this is the purpose of journalism, is to tell stories and lay out the facts and, you know, start a discussion, start a debate, let people, you know, and inform people. And I think she's accomplished that, and is definitely deserving of the prize, and is completely consistent with a long tradition of journalism, you know, puncturing myths and rattling cages.
Eric, anything to add?
I have nothing to add. That was brilliant. Hey, I like the reference of the Pentagon Papers, Daniel Ellsberg. That's great. I could just see him in that press conference. You know, I don't think many people would think 10 years is a lot to ask for protection of your country, or paraphrase. Yeah, it rattles cages when you write about what's happening.
So let me ask kind of one final question, because here our state sits with legislation on the table. If you could quickly, because we don't have a lot of time, if it passes, what would be the response from us as Iowans, as Americans? What should we do if our legislature would be willing to pass something like this?
Exercise the First Amendment right to freedom to assemble.
Well, I think it would immediately be challenged in court, and I would question whether, I mean our courts here aren't what they used to be, but I have to think that this is likely unconstitutional. But I mean, I hope we don't get to that point. I hope they come to their senses and just decide that this is not something we need.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Well, we never have enough time, especially for a topic like this. And I would hope Iowans would, despite the discomfort that we might feel about hearing this truth, that they would be against any censorship or deleting of our American history. And so we often repeat the phrase that education is the key. And if so, then it is important to make sure that education of our youth is historically accurate. In the immortal words of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., we must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools. Also quoting, the time is always right to do what's right. Let each of us be strong enough to believe that sometimes the ugly truth of our country's history is worth learning in order to not repeat it. Thank you and good day.